Hello, shalom, and welcome to another episode of Congressional Conversations, where we discuss the priorities of New York's Jewish community with members of the New York Congressional Delegation. I'm your host, Michael Miller, the Executive Vice President and CEO of the Jewish Community Relations Council of New York, JCRC-NY. And today we welcome a longtime friend of the Jewish community of New York, of the JCRC, and of mine, Representative Jerry Nadler from New York's 10th Congressional District, and the very well-known chairman of the Judiciary Committee, the House Judiciary Committee. It's my pleasure to welcome Representative Nadler. Welcome aboard.
Well, thank you very much.
At this stage of the pandemic, Congressman, what have been your goals for supporting New Yorkers in the next COVID relief bill?
Well, my objective is in supporting New York's next COVID relief bill is to get the funds, obviously, to deal with COVID, and I think we've done that in the American Relief Act. There are plenty of funds there for the vaccine, and in fact, what's even more important than the funding of the vaccine is that the president is, unlike the prior president, unlike President Trump, who refused to do so, President Biden has invoked the Defense Production Act. And the Defense Production Act is an act passed during World War II, and it gives the government the power to commandeer the use of any manufacturing facility for a wartime purpose. And this is a war on COVID. So President Trump refused to invoke it, but President Biden has invoked it, and he has used it to commandeer all necessary plants for the manufacture of the vaccines. And so this is why he was able to promise the other day that that vaccinations would be available to everybody by May 1st.
And do you think that there's going to be a ramping up in New York across the state, from downstate to upstate?
Oh, without question. If there isn't, it's because of the incompetence of New York officials, which I do not anticipate. But the fact is that because the vaccine is going to be essentially available to everyone by May 1st, it should be available to everyone in New York included by May 1st. And if it isn't, it's because New York officials have screwed it up somehow.
Right. So one of the issues where I'm not sure if it's a screw up, it could just be systematic, is healthcare disparities. What healthcare disparities have been exacerbated by this pandemic? What have you in Congress been able to do to address them? We've certainly have seen them here in New York City. We've established a interfaith coalition in Brooklyn initially, hopefully go to the other boroughs as well. But again, it's interfaith, interethnic coalition around the healthcare disparities. What can be done from the congressional level to try to close those gaps?
Well, essentially, a couple of things from the congressional level. One is to make the vaccine available to everybody, which, as I mentioned, we have done effective by March 1st. And the other, which is one of the causes of the disparities, is a reluctance on the part of minority people to take vaccines.
Correct.
And this is understandable because of the Tuskegee experiment, and right. I assume you know what that is.
Yes.
And the progeny of that. And also, it's one reason for it. The other reason is that survey research has shown that reluctance to take vaccines splits sharply along party lines. That the Republicans, by and large, do not want to take the vaccines. And that's because President Trump and other party leaders, such as Governor DeSantis and Governor Abbott, have said you shouldn't get vaccinated. I don't know what you do about that part of it, but the first part you can definitely affect.
Yeah, and the impact on small business has also been exacerbated by this pandemic as time has gone along. Certainly in your district, particularly with the restaurants. So again, how can beyond the Recovery Act, what can Congress do, or maybe within the Recovery Act, what can
Well,
Congress
within the
do?
Recovery Act, we provided $23 billion for the state and the city to ensure for small bit to ensure they can recover now and not cut critical programs in the future. And because we knew from the start that small businesses would be hit hard by lockdowns and closures, uh, we continue to extend and increase support to sustain small businesses while making sure our efforts were targeted at the smallest, most at-risk businesses. For example, more than well, you know that 1,000 restaurants in the city have closed,
Yeah.
but we directed targeted funding for independent restaurants in the American Rescue Plan. And these payments should help restaurants stay afloat as we continue to carefully and thoughtfully reopen the city.
Well, that's really very, very important. I've been speaking to a number of members of Congress from the New York delegation, and that small business issue is really very high up. And of course, Nydia Velasquez, your colleague, serves as chair of the Small Business Committee. But let's shift to speaking of chairpersonships. You are the chair of the judiciary, very influential Judiciary Committee. So, what have been, let's say, the top three issues that you would want to highlight for our viewership that you have on your agenda, Congressman?
Well, historically, the Judiciary Committee has been the busiest and most productive committee in the House, and this year is no exception. Our jurisdiction includes civil rights, civil liberties, immigration, the federal courts, intellectual property, antitrust, bankruptcy, crime, and a lot of other issues. And we're working hard on all these fronts. Some of our recent hearings have covered drug policy, the need for more federal judges, reviving competition in the marketplace, forced arbitration clauses, and the rise of domestic terrorism. Just since February, the House has passed H.R. 1 to protect and expand voting rights and crack down on government corruption. The Equality Act, which would to protect the LGBT community from discrimination, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act to rebuild trust between law enforcement and communities of color, and two bills to require universal gun background checks and strengthen the background check system. And this week alone, the House will also pass, this week, the House is going to pass reauthorization of the Violence Against Women Act, legislation to remove the deadline for ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment, and two immigration bills, including the DREAM Act to protect young people who were brought to this country as children. This is just a sample of what we've accomplished already, and we've got a lot more to do.
So, in what stages are HR 1, HR 5, the For the People Act, and the HRS Equality Act?
Well, HR 1 is, as I've said, has passed the House. HR 5 has passed the House. They're awaiting action in the Senate. Of course, in the past, Mitch McConnell has been the graveyard of bills, but he doesn't have the power to do that anymore. Although some of these bills, anything we can't get into a reconciliation bill, which in the judiciary jurisdiction is most, these bills will face a Senate filibuster, and the Senate Democrats are going to have to figure out how to deal with that. I hope they abolish the filibuster, or at least put major exceptions into it. But that's the gauntlet they have to face.
Yeah, we all recognize that. There's one additional piece of legislation that I would really like to get your views on, and that are really the catalyst for it, and that's HR 40, the Commission to Study and Develop Reparation Proposals for African Americans Act. How does this legislation address past and current injustices? And once again, where is it in the congressional process?
Well, we plan to have a hearing on it shortly in our committee. It doesn't directly address racial injustices. What it does is commission a study of reparations. That is a study of how to make reparations for all past discrimination and slavery and racism. And this bill hopefully will pass. And if it does, we'll have to await the results of the study.
And are you hopeful? I mean, is there a pushback on it?
So far, no. So far, we've been I haven't seen any pushback toward it.
Okay, so let's shift to another major issue, and that's immigration. Considering that the Democrats hold the House, they hold the Senate, and they also hold now the executive branch, the White House, what are the legislative steps that need to occur to make an immigration bill possible while your party is in control?
Well, just last week, the House passed the key immigration bills, bills for agricultural guest workers, bills for the DREAM Act, kids, not necessarily kids anymore, but people who came here as children. We passed these bills just last week in the House. They go to the Senate. The Republicans have expressed opposition to them, and they will face the same gauntlet as the other bills. We've got to figure out a way past the filibuster for them.
So that's pretty much where it stands, is a filibuster challenge.
That's right.
Okay. So things that might be more somewhat more in control on the House side, and that's dealing with Israel and the peace process. What role, in your view, does the United States look at with regard to re-engagement with both the Israelis and the Palestinians on the peace process? We've heard from the president, we've heard from the Secretary of State. Secretary of State, if I remember correctly, was before the Foreign Affairs Committee on the House side. What do you expect the United States to do to try to jumpstart actually just even initiate some dormant conversations, negotiations between the Israelis and the Palestinians?
Well, between the Israelis and the Palestinians, there will be diplomatic initiatives by the United States. These will be behind the scenes initially, I suspect, and we'll see them when they become public. But I don't know. Obviously, the administration certainly wants to revive those discussions, and they will. Connected to that, of course, is Iran, and this administration is committed to undoing the terrible damage that Trump did by pulling out of the Iran deal. When he pulled out, the Iran deal was designed to, with good policing, the best what's the word I'm looking for? Not policing. It's the best inspection system of any treaty since World War II. Designed with the best inspection system to prevent Iran from being able to get nuclear weapons. By pulling out of and we had inspectors there and looking at every possible site, and by pulling out of the deal, President Trump essentially gave permission to the Iranians to develop nuclear weapons because he removed any impediment to them. And we know that since that happened, they've begun ramping up the purification of plutonium from the general plutonium to bomb-grade material. They've gone a long way down the road to that. And now I expect the Biden administration, by getting back into it or trying to get back into it, because the Iranians are under no obligation to let them, because we broke the terms of the treaty by pulling out under Trump. But I know that Biden is going to put every possible pressure on the Iranians and the other signatories to the treaty to reestablish it, and that would require the Iranians to take the nuclear grade material they've already established and send it out of the country, and then stay within a strict monitoring guideline for 40 years.
Right. So there are two issues. One of them is the sunset clause, which has troubled many. And obviously there's a trustworthiness or lack thereof of the Iranians and
Well,
the role.
there's no question of trustworthiness, because the whole point of the agreement is not to trust. It's not built on trust. It's built on the assumption that they'll try to cheat, and puts into place a system to make it absolutely impossible for them to do so.
Right. But again, back to the sunset clause. Is that something that you would expect would be renegotiated for the United States to step back in? And then there's the issue, the other issue is one of
Yes,
sanctions.
yes. When that deal was signed initially, it provided for a 25-year phase out. And there were people like me and others, some others, who figured that at some point before that 25 years was over, we would pressure the Iranians to extend the deadline. Well, that's certainly something we ought to do now, is pressure the Iranians in signing a new version of the treaty to extend that deadline.
And do sanctions play a role in that, Congressman?
Well, that depends what's negotiated. Hopefully, certainly.
Okay. I want to shift now to politics and the presence in New York and across the country, but our focus is on New York, of the Democratic Socialists of America, the DSA. As you know, they circulated a questionnaire first with regard to the state legislature, state legislative seats, and then subsequently, currently, with regard to the seats in the New York City Council. And one of their questions is whether you would accept an invitation from an organization such as ours, as we're the ones that do these trips, for trips to Israel, missions to Israel. We've had the pleasure and honor of having you accompany a mission or two during timeframes that you've been in Israel. And I just am curious as to what your views are on the DSA questionnaire. And the other question, of course, is about whether you support BDS or don't support BDS. And if you don't support it, why not?
Well, of course I don't support BDS.
Yeah, that's not for you. I'm talking about for, is that the right question? Are those the right questions that should be posed?
Yeah, I think they are.
Council candidates.
I think they are. You know, DSA is an organization that's changed greatly. I used to be a member of DSA many years ago, until the early 90s. I changed for a lot of, I quit it for a number of reasons. Yeah, their current position is obnoxious. And there's no justifying it whatsoever. They support BDS. They support the kind of questions you asked, you mentioned, because they have a very one-sided and destructive view of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and there's nothing to be done about them except to beat them.
And how important, in your view, are these trips to Israel?
Oh, the trips to Israel are very important. I thought you were going to ask me how important is DSA. DSA is not important. It does not represent very many people at all. The trips to Israel are very important. They always have been, because there are a lot of lies and misunderstandings floating around about Israel and Palestine. And these trips give members a chance to see for themselves what the truth is. So they've always been valuable, and they still are.
Well, I can't thank you enough, Congressman Nadler, for spending so much time with us and answering our questions. Would you like to share just a word to our viewing audience, particularly as we're approaching Pesach?
Well, besides Aziz and Pesach, no, I mean, it's now somewhat of an optimistic time. We've come through, or we're coming through, a pandemic, which has been a terrible, terrible experience, but we anticipate that should be coming to an end, and hopefully this Pesach will be, I trust this Pesach will be a happier one than last Pesach, and just to say that I hope soon we'll be able to resume these meetings in person, and I look forward to that.
Yeah, as do we. Hopefully the Congressional Breakfast will be on this coming year, and that you will be there to join us as the chair of the House Judiciary Committee. We'd be honored to have you there. So thank you very much, Chairman Nadler, for joining us. Thanks to our audience for viewing, for watching. To learn more about some of the issues that we discussed today, please check out JCRC-NY's 2021 Focus on Communal Priorities, which is available on our website, jcrcny.org. We look forward to seeing you next time on Congressional Conversations. Thank you again. Our gratitude to the Congressman, our gratitude to our viewers. Shalom to all.